The title today is Staying Sane in a Crazy World. And when I sat down to work on this, what I wanted to do was look at things that are going on around us right now that are really stress-inducing, that seem to make no sense, and how can we deal with them to better operate and keep our composure when the world seems upside down and inside out. And the first thing that came to my mind was the political situation. And for some of you, this is not a stressful time. You don't care, either you're not voting, or you're very happy with one of the two main candidates, and you know you're going to vote for them, and you're not stressing at all. But a lot of people are stressing, and I encounter people that are stressing. And not just a little bit, that they're really agonizing over who they're going to vote for president. So, as I talk about this, I want to stress, I'm not talking about candidates today. It's illegal for me to stand up here and advocate for a candidate, and frankly, although I'm leaning one way, I'm not sure what's going to happen even in my life in November. So I would encourage you, during talkback, we're not talking about candidates, we're talking about a process and also how to deal with the stress involved in the process, and a little bit of history and some options for you that might help to reduce stress or help you come up with an answer if you're wrestling. And if you're not, the first part of this sermon might be largely not applicable to you, but there is a part two that hopefully will be, so just stick with me and don't tune out. I am a political junkie, guilty as charged. I've always found it interesting, even all the way back in junior high school. And this is going to sound a little weird to some of you, but when I was in junior high, I remember sitting down and watching the Republican convention live on TV, and the reason was it was a tight race. Ford and Reagan were running against each other. And they were, even though Ford was probably going to get it, there was still some doubt. And so the newspaper, and I delivered a newspaper at the time, the Washington Star, printed out a ballot, or a ballot state by state, and what they thought the votes were going to be for each candidate from those states. And I sat there as a middle schooler with that ballot and a pen, and I was writing all the votes down as we went through the convention. Now, if at that young, impressionable age, I am keeping track of the score for Ford and Reagan at a convention, there's probably something in my DNA that says I'm going to be interested in politics. And I've always found it fascinating on a night when there's a primary. I'll turn on the news and I'll watch the votes come in. And to me, it's like an interesting competition. It's almost like watching a sporting event. So I do have an interest in this. And so when it comes time to vote, I take it seriously, and I try to make the best choice regardless of whether I think my candidate has a chance or not. You know, I'm the sort of guy that will always vote for the person I think will be the best, even if they're third party, even if they're trailing by a mile in the polls, doesn't matter to me. But again, I'm not going to be advocating for candidates as I talk, but I do want to talk about the stress involved with this political season, because it is a really weird political season. For instance, both Trump and Clinton have the dubious honor of being rated worse in the area of people that are highly unfavorable since the Gallup poll has begun, or polling has begun in our country. Both of them have worse ratings than any previous candidate, Republican or Democrat. The previous record holder, you have to go all the way back to 1964, Barry Goldwater. And if you know anything about politics and Barry Goldwater, they were running ads about Barry Goldwater with a little girl picking flowers, and then a nuclear bomb goes off and the mushroom cloud goes up because Barry Goldwater is going to lead us into nuclear war. That was the sort of advertising that was going on in 1964. He had a 26% unfavorable rating. That's the highest until this time, right now. Now, remember, 26 was the record. Hillary Clinton currently has, and this is as of July, 33% highly unfavorable. We're not even talking unfavorable or neutral. Highly unfavorable. Donald Trump, 42%. So we have two candidates who have both beat the previous record right now. And that's pretty astonishing. And how we got to this point would be a fascinating discussion and could go on for hours and hours. How did both parties manage to pick someone more disliked than Barry Goldwater. It is fascinating and can be scary too, and stress-inducing. Now, if you're one of the two people who don't fall in that category and you like one or the other, again, I am not criticizing you or your choice. I'm just saying the country as a whole is going through convulsions about what are we going to do and why do we have these two people that we dislike so much. It's 33%, 42%, and people are stressing. There are quite a few high-ranking Republicans, including the last two Republican presidents, who said they will not vote for the Republican nominee. That's unprecedented. And then there are people who say, I cannot vote for either Trump or Clinton. High-ranking individuals, well-known individuals who are simply saying the two options are both completely unpalatable. Again, largely unprecedented in recent history. I understand that in the old days, early days of our country, we had vicious political fights. I know that. I'm talking about modern history since we've had polling, because there's crazy stuff going on way back then also. But as we stress with this, I wanted to give you some things that I've found are helpful to me and might be helpful to you. First of all, I vote as much for the character of the person as I do for their political stands or their issues. Because in our government, we're not nominating or electing a king or a dictator. Whoever gets elected is still going to have to deal with Congress. Laws are still going to have to be passed going through Congress. The president doesn't get up there and then just rule by decree, although there are some executive things that are going on of late where that's starting to happen a little bit. But, for instance, I used to have a Bernie Sanders sticker on my car. I'm not shy about that. It's not because I was a socialist or a democratic socialist or that I agreed with Bernie on everything. But I liked Bernie as a person. And maybe that's stupid to elect someone that way, but I felt that his character had been established over many years, and I felt that of the choices, he was the one least likely to be in it just for himself, although I can't read his mind, I understand that. He seemed to really care genuinely about the plight of people in this country, and to genuinely care. Now, I don't know if the other candidates care or not. It's all relative. I'm not condemning anyone else. But I liked him because I liked him. And even though I certainly did not agree with all of his issues, I still voted for him in the primaries, and I thought, this is a guy I would trust when it comes to issues of having the nuclear codes, deciding whether or not we're going to use military intervention somewhere or go to war. I felt comfortable with him as a person and as a leader. Now the bumper sticker's gone, he's not running, that's a moot point. But there are people who would come up to me and say, how can you support him? Do you want the country to go socialist? And I'd say, the country's not going to go socialist, even if he gets elected. It's not going to go socialist. So I'm not worried about that. But I like the guy. I think I trust him. And so that's not what this is all about. And they go, oh yeah, you're right. Because unless you get a Congress filled with people who agree, there's not going to be any dramatic change there. So it really comes down to the powers that the president really has. And the president doesn't make laws. The president has the nuclear codes. The president can send our forces to war. The president chooses Supreme Court nominees, but they still have to get approved, and we may never see another one approved the way things are going now. We may get down to a Supreme Court of 3 people one of these days. And so, who do you trust doing those things? So there are some options. If you are one of those people who falls into the 33 and 42% of very much dislike the current two candidates of the two major parties, you could, 1, stay home and not vote. 2, write in a candidate. Some people do that. They usually write in something goofy like Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck as a protest vote. Pat Polson, who has run for president for centuries now. 3, you could choose in your mind the lesser of two evils. That's often the argument you hear. You got two people, it's going to be one of those two. You got to pick the one that's least worst, or the lesser of two evils. Or 4, you could vote third party. And I have a few thoughts on these. I will confess proudly that I was a Florida resident in the year 2000. And if you know anything about politics, that was the hotly contested race where George W. Bush barely beat Al Gore, and please don't get into the argument about whether George W. Bush really won the election or not. Most of what I've seen is, even though it was extremely close, and you can disagree with the process, he probably did get more votes. And anyway, that's history, it's done. I don't want to fight that battle again. But I did vote for Ralph Nader. And you have undoubtedly heard that all those horrible people that voted for Ralph Nader gave it to George W. Bush because they should have voted for Al Gore instead of Ralph Nader. And that's assuming, A, that everyone who voted for Ralph Nader would have voted for Gore if he wasn't in the race, and we don't know that. And B, it assumes that you're never allowed to vote for the person you would choose, but rather you can only vote for the two people the two major parties give you. And I've never bought that argument. I still don't buy that argument. You may disagree with me. That's fine. I think you should vote for the person you think would make the best president. And I don't know that Ralph Nader would have made the best president, and maybe he would have made a terrible president. But at the time, knowing what I knew, I made my choice. And I don't lose sleep over it. And that's not to say I'm sorry about some of the stuff George W. Bush did, because I am sorry, and I was involved in it as I was in the military. So it touched my life. Nonetheless, I would still have done the same thing because I vote my conscience. And that's one thing you might do to help reduce your stress. You're not wasting your vote if you vote for a third-party candidate. I'm not saying you should, I'm saying it's an option. And there are 3 third parties out there that have actually put the work in to get on enough states that they could conceivably win if they won all the states where they're on the ballot. That's the Libertarian Party, the Green Party, and the Constitution Party. If you're not familiar with them, Green Party in general is very leftist or progressive or liberal. Constitution Party's on the other extreme, hard right, Tea Party type. Libertarians would say they're in the middle, socially liberal, fiscally conservative, or as they like to say, socially rational, fiscally conservative. And those 3 parties are doing the work to at least get on the ballots. There are other parties out there that show up on 1, 2, or 3 state ballots. What's the point? But they're doing it. There's a couple of socialist parties out there that are barely on any state ballots. Tennessee's not one of them at the moment. But you say, well, they don't stand a chance. But there's a couple of things to keep in mind. If you vote for third party, even if you think they're not going to win, if they get 5% of the overall total national vote, they get public campaign funds next time around. Now, you may remember Ross Perot and his party, the Reform Party. They got a ton. He got 19% of the vote. He got a ton of money. And so there was a Reform Party on all the state ballots because of his performance. And Pat Buchanan ran 4 years later. He didn't have to worry about getting on the ballots. Because they had done so well previously, they got public funding and got on the ballots. And 5%, and it is based on your percentage, 5% this time around would get you about $10 million for the next election cycle for any of these parties. Now, normally, these parties are thrilled if they get 1%. Right now, the Libertarian Party is polling at around 10, 11%. The Green Party is around 5, 6%. Constitution Party is still not showing up. If they maintain that and get that, you will have public funding for 4 parties in 4 years. And all 4 parties will be on all the state ballots based on getting 5%. That's unprecedented in this country if 4 parties were able to do that. So that's one reason to vote for third party, just to give you more options down the road. I think it would also be wonderful to have third party candidates at the national debates, which are coming up pretty quick. You have to get 15% in 5 different polls averaged out in order to be on or in the debates. None of them have achieved that yet, but it is conceivable, especially for the Libertarian Party, which is now at 10-11%. They might make it. Green Party's not out of it yet. So that would be interesting also. If you ever get called up and polled on who you would vote for, throw your vote to a third party, help them get into the debates, if nothing else. That's not locking your vote in, it's just giving you more options to hear more views. So it is a crazy political season, and nothing's going to surprise me anymore. Well, maybe if Trump and Clinton get into a fist fight at one of the debates, that might surprise me, but that might not even surprise me. But since I'm talking about how to stay sane in a crazy world, my first piece of advice is to take your vote seriously. Do a little research, think about what you want to do, think about who you want in the Oval Office and the powers that go directly to the president. And don't let people convince you you're wasting your vote. If you're not voting for one of the two major party candidates, don't let them tell you that, because there is a way to waste your vote. And let me tell you a story about how to really waste your vote. In 2014, we had a Tennessee election for governor. Bill Haslam, who is our governor, was running, and the Democrats had a primary with 4 candidates. Only one of those 4 candidates had even bothered to create a website. So the other 3 weren't serious. And the 4th one actually would probably still have lost, but at least had some governing experience at the county level. But because the names are listed alphabetically, and the first name was Charlie Brown, everyone thought, oh cool, I'll vote for Charlie Brown. Charlie Brown, clean clock, and won. Charlie Brown's entire platform for governor was 2 things. Get the Bible back in schools and put Bill Haslam in the electric chair and set it for 50%.
Wow.
That's it. That's Charlie Brown's campaign platform. Charlie Brown misspelled his name on his Facebook page.
Wow.
Charlie Brown's picture was him with 3 giant catfish. He won the Democratic nomination for governor of the state of Tennessee. You want to waste your vote? Go in and vote for a guy whose name is based on a cartoon character. And people did it. And I know someone who did it because I was ranting about this, and she said, oh, I did that. If you're going to go in and vote, and you don't know who you're voting for, leave it blank. You don't have to vote for everything on the ballot. You can leave it blank. You're allowed to do that. Don't go in and randomly vote for somebody. What's even more astonishing is that when they had the main election with Bill Haslam versus Charlie Brown, the man who couldn't spell his own name, Charlie Brown still got 310,000 votes. 310,000 people in the state of Tennessee thought Charlie Brown would be a good governor. That scares me. That tells me a lot of people waste their vote. I'm done ranting. Don't waste your vote. You can go onto a website, and with minimal effort, you can start checking out all the candidates to see where they stand on issues, if they even have a website. And my feeling is, if a candidate's not willing to at least put out a website, they're not a serious candidate. Look for the ones who are at least trying. Don't waste your vote. But now we're going to leave politics behind and move on to a broader perspective of how we stay sane in a crazy world. Right now, there are things going on that make me feel like we're living in a Twilight Zone episode, and maybe you also. How do we keep sane when the world seems to be going mad? And this is fertile ground. You could do a lot of sermons and talks on this. But I think the answer, at least part of the answer, is very simple. Whatever it is you're doing, this is going to sound so basic, you're going to, oh, thanks, Doug, that's a lot of help. Whatever it is you're doing, give it your best shot. Try your very best to do your very best. Think, what are the ramifications of my actions? Am I going to cause harm, or am I going to do good? And I realize good and bad are relative terms, but as you make decisions on how you're going to live your life, and each step that you take, each action that you perform, are you doing your best? Are you being conscientious? It sounds so basic, and yet it's hard to do. on a day-to-day basis. But if you are trying your best, I think this does help you to keep grounded, to help keep sane when things seem nuts around you. And as I was writing this, and as I was thinking this, for the first time in all the years I've been doing this, it just occurred to me that this notion that you can do your best, and you know you're not always going to succeed, you can make mistakes, but this notion that making mistakes is part of the process and that's okay, this is sort of contrary to many fundamentalist religions and ideologies, which insist that there's one correct way, and every time you make a mistake, it's horrible, that you deviated, and you're going to get punished either in this life or the next, or, because politics does this too, if you've stepped across a line of orthodoxy in politics, you can be punished politically or socially. All these things are ways of molding you to where you think, I have to conform, I can't take a risk, I can't think for myself, I can't dare make a mistake, because that's unacceptable within this group. And I thought, it is so sad to see people punished for simply making a mistake or coming to a wrong conclusion. Think about how many religions would punish you for making a different conclusion about the nature of God, or the existence of God, or whether one religion has value or not, or a ritual has value or not. And if you come to a different conclusion, you're ostracized or punished or kicked out or whatever for simply thinking for yourself and daring possibly to make a mistake. In Unitarian Universalism, and not to say we're perfect, we certainly aren't, we have plenty of flaws, but we are allowed and even encouraged to take risks and make mistakes as we seek truth and meaning. We try not to enforce upon you a certain orthodoxy, that you have to believe these things or you're out. We want nothing to do with you. We allow a great deal of diversity and freedom of thought, more so, I dare say, than almost any other religion. Again, not to say that we're perfect. We have our flaws and we have our blind spots also. I know this. But making mistakes, changing your mind, seeing things differently, evolving as a person, these are expected as part of healthy growth. And they are encouraged, I hope, within all Unitarian Universalist congregations. And I think this is true here. This in turn helps to reduce the stress of always having to make the right choice, to know God's will, to avoid sinning, to know the truth, and to never deviate from orthodoxy. Good luck with that. No, I think that seeking to do the right thing, doing your best, trying while knowing that you're going to make mistakes, that is expected and it's okay. And it will help you to maintain your sanity in a Twilight Zone world. And since I think this is a healthy way to live, I find it wonderful to be in a congregation that understands and appreciates the human effort it takes to make sense of a very complex world. It allows us to make mistakes, to be human, without hating our humanity. And anyone who's been around during my full tenure, you've seen me change a lot. You've seen me go down different options and explore, change, grow, evolve. And yet, we allow our ministers to do that. We allow our people to do that. It's all part of what it is to be Unitarian Universalist. So I deeply, deeply appreciate that. Our community is filled with groups that oppose this sort of thing, that don't like that evolution, that don't like that open-mindedness. But here, we can embrace what it is to be human. And the vagaries, the unknowns, the mistakes, and the stumbles we make as human. We understand it and we appreciate it. And because people need that, need a community like this in our lives, we fill a very important void. And I hope that we can be here for many, many years to come to help the people who are wrestling with these very issues. You're a special bunch. You may not realize it. You may sometimes overlook the uniqueness of what's here. I have deeply appreciated everything that the last 7.5 years of ministry have brought to me by being surrounded by people who allow me to evolve, change, make mistakes, and I hope you find that same appreciation in your life and your involvement with this congregation. May we be here for many, many years to come. Thank you.